the summer of 2021 to 2022, I was a lifeguard at a small beach called Adams Point Beach, which is located in Quechee Lake, New York. I didn't really enjoy my job, to be honest, besides making friends with the other lifeguards. I wasn't getting paid enough money, and my final paycheck of the summer of 2021 was $350. To make matters even more difficult, I come from a family with no money. I live in a farm, and my parents fight with each other a lot. I never went to college because my family can't afford it, so I have to work 2 jobs every day. One from 9 to 5, and the other from 6 to 11, where I only get paid $15 an hour. In the summer of 2022, my boss, for whatever reason, had demoted me to a sub-lifeguard. This really pissed me off because I couldn't see my friends. One day in August of 2022, I was called in to substitute for a lifeguard, as this lifeguard was busy that day and only one other lifeguard was available. Usually there are 3 lifeguards, but that day was a shortage of staff. The start of that day was like how a day would usually start. Unfortunately, that changed in the afternoon. My 30-minute shift on the lifeguard chair was done, and the other lifeguard swapped with me. I walked back to the shed and went inside of it. About 10 minutes later, while I was on my phone, I heard a bunch of screaming and crying outside of the shed with the door closed. I didn't know what was going on, so I walked outside. What I saw next is an image that I will never unsee for the rest of my life. What I saw was the lifeguard, along with 4 other people, have a woman on a surf rescue board with both of her legs severed off. I felt petrified, but I had to help the other lifeguard as it was my job to save people. I helped carry the surfboard, but I looked behind me as it was so brutal to look at what was in front of me. I helped everyone place the board on a table with the woman laying on it right next to the shed. Thankfully, the police and medics were already called. I asked what had happened. One guy said, a guy by himself in a speedboat wasn't looking where he was driving his boat, and people told him to stop and slow down, but he was in his own world. He then ran over the woman, then would come to a stop like 3 seconds later. Then, he apparently took off like a coward would do. I could not believe what I was hearing. I then told the man to describe what the speedboat looked like. I asked him this because this was a very small lake, and I pretty much know everyone who comes to this lake and lives right next to it. He said, it was a blue jet boat. When the man told me this, I felt as if my whole world was coming to end. That is my dad's boat. He is the only one who owns a jet boat on this lake. I then saw everything turn blurry, and then it all went to black. I then woke up to 2 EMTs side by side next to me. They asked if I was all right. I told them I was fine, and then I went to go grab my water bottle and then drank the water as if I had never drunk water before in my life. I then exited the beach area as my boss told everyone to go home because of what happened today. I got in my car and I drove home, which was about 3 to 4 minutes away. As I got home, I turned off my car, stepped out to see my dad pacing back and forth nervously through the kitchen window. I then rushed inside of the house and I went on a full rampage to my father. I confronted him and then called him a pussy for leaving the scene of the accident. He was breathing so hard. I had never seen him breathing like this ever before. As I was still yelling at him and my adrenaline was kicking in more than ever before, I shoved him, then starting hitting him. He told me to calm the fuck down. After about 10 hits, I finally pushed him to his full limits, and he punched me so hard that I fell to the ground and my ears were ringing. He then yelled at me to stay the fuck down, you stupid little bitch, before running out of the house and speeding off somewhere. I continued to bawl my eyes out. I was never close with my dad. I never came to him for help when needed, but never in a million years would I thought he would end up doing something so horrific. About an hour and a half later, my mother finally came home after going to the hospital to check on the woman who my father had injured. As my mother walked through the door, she hugged me for which it felt like an eternity, and we cried together. We sat down together at the dinner table, and she told me some good news and bad news. The good news is that the woman is alive and okay. The bad news is that she had to get both of her legs amputated off of her and have it be replaced with bionic legs. I felt so relieved that she survived, but I was still so devastated that my father took off, never even apologized, and never came to see the women in the hospital. My mother asked me where did my husband go. I told my mom that he took off. We tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. The police were called again, and we filed a missing persons report on my dad. The next few weeks, the police tried searching everywhere for him and came up empty-handed. It was the worst 3 weeks of my life. I quit my job straight after due to the traumatic sight I have seen on that very day. I have been seeing a psychologist 3 times a week now. Each day I was very slowly starting to get better and better, but I still have a long way to go. I also only work one job now and have been promoted at my job, which now I get paid $25 an hour. This makes me happier as I still have some luck in this world. I still have not seen my father since. I don't really miss him that much after he attacked me and calling me a bitch. I wish I can tell you that the story ends here, but sadly it does not, and the next part gets even worse. Fast forwarding to sometime in mid-July, during this past summer of 2024, I decided to go kayaking at 7 o'clock at night. I wanted to exercise my brain, and I needed some free time for myself. I took off in my kayak. I kayaked in the area of around 30 feet deep, then kayaking to the shallower area. My destination to stop was at a land area to walk on it, and to take a break from kayaking as my arms were getting sore. During this whole time kayaking, I looked at the water beneath me. As I got to around 15 feet deep, what I saw on the bottom of the ground underneath the water was textbook horror. I saw a dead body of an old woman. I paddled out of there so fast, and then reaching to my destination that I originally planned to go. After pulling my kayak to shore, I ran into the grass area and threw up around 5 times. Luckily, I had my phone on me, so I called 911. The police came 10 minutes later. About 7 cop cars showed up, along with a SWAT team. I gave them my story and they told me to evacuate the area as it will be going under investigation. About 2 weeks later, we got the worst news ever. More worse news than anyone who lived in my town had ever gotten before. The detective told us that this person was murdered. They also traced DNA fingerprints to find out who the perpetrator is, and it worked. When they revealed who the killer was, I was nowhere near prepared to find out who it would be. It was my estranged father. Why the hell would he come back to this town if his main goal was to try to escape this town? I couldn't think of any motive of why he would kill this person. This was so devastating that the next day, I packed most of clothes and drove off all the way downstate to New York City. I needed a break from this so-called curse that is going on upstate in my hometown. I stayed in New York City for about 3 weeks in a cheap hotel, then came back. The police, this time along with the FBI, searched again for my father, and yet again, nothing. I quit my job after this, and now I am unemployed. Luckily, I have my little sister, who had just graduated high school, take over for me. As you are hearing this story as of now, there is still no updates on where my father could possibly be. He could be living in another state far away, or maybe he could have fled the country. I never went to see my father ever again after hearing that he murdered another human being. If there is more news revolving around this case, I will keep you posted. I was a freshman at a small college called Five Towns College in Long Island, New York. In 2020, when the coronavirus pandemic was still going on, it is a performing arts college. I majored in music performance with a minor in audio production. Not that many people know about this college. This has to be the worst college in New York. They overpay a lot of people who can't afford college. They will accept anybody in. The professors and advisors don't care about their jobs. They pass anyone and let them all graduate. And the people who actually study hard and graduate don't ever get jobs from the majors they studied in. And worst of all, this campus used to be a middle school. I had graduated this past May, and I am happy as hell to finally get out of that dumpy school. Backtracking to 2020. I started taking classes there in August of 2020. I trusted this college to be a good experience at first, and I have since regret doing that. There were a lot of weird other students there who had horrible social skills, and there was a lot of other people smoking weed all day. I didn't really like anybody there and their antics, but there was one person that I disliked more than anyone else. There was this 23-year-old freshman guy named Jeremy. He was a theater kid. People say he is a creepy man that you should avoid at all times. A lot of other people told me that he stalks a lot of girls. I hoped that he would never stalk me, but sadly, this was so untrue. The first time I ever met him was in the school's cafeteria. He walked up to me as if we were best friends. He started off a conversation by saying, "Hello, my name is Jeremy. What about you?" I was being cautious of myself already because of what other people told me about his behavior. I just remained calmed and told him my name back and said that it was nice to meet you. The conversation then went on a little bit longer. We just told each other what our majors were and what we plan on doing after graduating college. Then my food came and I placed my food in a bag. He then waved and said, "Bye!" I said bye back in a soft voice with a neutral expression on my face. I was really scared at that moment. I turned back one last time to just see him staring at me, then I walked outside. I already got bad vibes from this dude. I want to make it clear that the next time we see each other, that I have no interest in talking to him. About a few days later, I saw him again in the cafeteria. This time, a bunch of people were there. He said hi again. I just said hi back and was ready to order my food and not waste time talking to this weirdo. He then started asking questions about how my day was and how classes were going. I just gave him simple one-word answers like yeah, no, or good. I did not want to talk to him. Then he asked a more creepy and personal question. He asked if I were single. Now this question I did not answer back. Thank God a cook who works there asked what I wanted to order, and I told him what I wanted. I then walked out from the kitchen area, then into the dining hall. I then heard Jeremy order, then him walking out of the kitchen right behind me. He then asked the same uncomfortable question again. I ignored him once again. Took him about 15 seconds for him to ask, "Why are you ignoring me?" Then another guy who was also waiting for his food jumped into the conversation and straight up told Jeremy to back off. She has no interest in talking to you. Beat it. Then things had escalated quickly. Then Jeremy asked the other guy, "Do you want to fight me?" He replied back with a disgusted expression, "No, I am just telling you to back off." After this, me and the other guy got our food at the same time, and we walked out together. As we did this, we heard Jeremy make a loud grunt, and this stomp his feet really loudly as he just stood there still waiting for his food. I then thanked this guy for having my back when things could have gotten a lot worse. He introduced himself as Connor. We had a nice small talk, and then walked back to our dorms. On an unrelated note, Connor turned out to be my boyfriend, and we're still a couple to this day. About 2 weeks have gone by, and I haven't seen Jeremy since. I was very surprised not to see him considering that this whole college has like 400 students, probably even less. I made a small friend group with the kids in my major, and we talked about our major. I felt more happy and safe at that moment, but I damn sure celebrated way too early. There was this one night when I was coming back from a party at a bar. I drove back to campus and I arrived back at around 11 o'clock. And as I walked back to my dorm, I saw Jeremy just standing outside of the college entrance doing nothing. He then turned his head to me. He was staring at me. I felt more like he was staring into my soul. I then walked away quickly because I was so freaked out at that moment. I got back to my dorm safely. A few nights later, things were getting a lot worse. One night I heard a knock at my window. I had a feeling that it was this Jeremy guy, but I wasn't 100% sure. It could be anyone. It is very uncommon to knock on someone's window this late at night. Maybe it could be a friend. My curiosity got the best of me, I took a deep breath and in one swift motion pulled the shade back, only to see, you know who? Jeremy. I threw the shade and fell back. How did he know where my dorm room was? I was so terrified at this moment that I locked myself in the bathroom. I was even more scared because I was living in a single. Luckily, Jeremy didn't live on campus, as he lived nearby because he told me this. I then came out of the bathroom about 15 minutes later. I braced myself to open the shade again. So I did, and this time felt relieved that he wasn't there anymore. It only got worse 2 nights later. After coming back from a late-night choir rehearsal, I of course saw Jeremy standing right outside the dorm area. This time, as I unlocked the gate, I ran for it and he was chasing me. Sadly, the gate didn't close in time and he managed to get through it. I ran all the way to my dorm hall. I was hoping an RA would be present there sitting in the booth. Sadly, the RA was not there, but there was a sign that said, "I will be back in like 10 to 15 minutes. I had to take a phone call." Of course they left, I said to myself. I found a perfect hiding spot. There was a lounge and it had a bathroom there. The bathroom was open and it had a door stopper keeping it open, so I hid behind that bathroom door. Yet again, the door to my dorm hall didn't close in time and Jeremy had entered the building. He looked all over for me. He must have saw the bathroom, but he never walked in or saw my eyes through the side. He then yelled, "Fuck!" out loud, then left the building. I waited another minute to see if he was really gone, and he was. I then entered my dorm room and the shades to the window were open and was happy to see that he wasn't there. The next day, I told my friends about what Jeremy has been doing to me, telling them he knocked on my dorm room window and chased me to my dorm room. They were all appalled and all agreed with each other that they will walk with me wherever I go. I felt so pleased with them, as they were real friends. Nothing happened for the next few days. A few nights later, I was chilling with my friends in my dorm room as they were there protecting me. We were eating food, listening to music, talking and playing video games. This was interrupted with a couple of bangs at the window. I then whispered to my friends to turn off the music. I then heard from outside the window, "Open up, I need to talk to you." It was Jeremy's voice. We all stayed silent. He then spoke again, saying, "Open the window right now, or else you will have to face consequences." Thankfully, the window was locked. Me and my friends all then went into the bathroom and hid and silently called the campus police, which I should have done days before, when the first time he knocked at my window. As we were all in the bathroom, we heard Jeremy trying to open the window and break it down. Luckily, the campus police arrived in just 5 minutes, not even. We then heard a knock at the door and the person yelling out, "Resident Life! It's all good now, you can open the door." This was not Jeremy's voice, and we all sighed out of relief. I opened the door and I told the head of Resident Life all of what had happened. They said they will contact the school administration and try to have him dismissed from the college campus. He also told me that they told him to leave, or they will call the real cops. I thanked him because he was really nice. I then told my friends that it was okay now, and you guys can leave. I hugged each one of them, and thanked them all. The next day I got some very exciting news. Jeremy had been removed from college campus, and totally dismissed from the school. I jumped out of my bed and said, "Woo," loudly, while I pumped my fists in the air. I was able to complete my college life without any more unsafe moments that could have me in danger. I still hated the college because it was just a bad school, besides my creepy stalker encounters. I have not seen or heard of Jeremy since, and I want to keep it that way for the rest of my life. My little sister Ella died a year ago. She was only 12. The doctors said it was natural causes, but there was nothing natural about what happened to her. The truth is, Our family killed her, slowly, over years of cruelty. It wasn't sudden, but a slow, deliberate breakdown of her spirit, of her soul. They broke her. Our father died when we were young, and my sister and I were taken in by his side of the family. It was supposed to be temporary, until our mother could get back on her feet, but it wasn't. Ella suffered the most. My father's family, my uncle, aunt, cousins, hated us. They hated her. They were monsters, but they wore the faces of family. The worst part? I couldn't do anything to stop it. I tried to protect Ella, but I was just a kid too. She'd get locked in the basement for days, the door clicking shut behind her while my aunt turned the key with a smile. Sometimes they'd forget to feed her. Other times, they'd do it on purpose. It wasn't just the physical abuse, it was the torment. The things they said to her. They loved to make her feel small, powerless. I remember seeing her eyes when they told her she wasn't worth anything, that no one would miss her if she disappeared. Her eyes went empty, dead. I didn't realize that, in a way, she had already died long before her heart stopped. Ella's death was a relief to them, a way to erase their guilt, bury their sins. I think they believed, deep down, that once she was gone, all the things they had done would be buried with her. They never expected what would happen next. The night after the funeral, something strange happened. Our mother, broken, hollow, not really there, stood apart from the rest of the family. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried since the day Ella died. I watched her walk up to the casket, her hands trembling as she touched Ella's cold face. For a moment, it looked like she was about to break down, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned over Ella's still body and whispered something into her ear. I wasn't close enough to hear it, but I saw the look in her eyes. I'll never forget that look. It was unsettling, like she was speaking to someone she knew would hear her, someone who wasn't really gone. Later that night, I asked her what she whispered. At first, she didn't answer. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. But then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she told me, I told her to avenge me. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I thought it was just her grief talking. After all, the family had taken everything from us. I thought she was just angry, broken. But now, looking back, I realize it was something much darker. The first sign that something was wrong happened the night after the funeral. It started with the sounds. It was subtle at first, soft whispers that seemed to come from the walls, like distant voices carried on the wind. But the house was still. There was no wind. I remember standing in the hallway, holding my breath, listening. It wasn't random noise. It was too clear, too deliberate. You know what you did. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I told myself I was just hearing things. But the whispers grew louder each night. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside the house, crawling through the cracks in the walls, echoing in the corners. Sometimes I'd catch a word or two, but other times, it was just the soft, almost pleading sound of a voice I couldn't place, but the others heard it too. My uncle, the cruelest of them all, was the first to crack. He began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, screaming about seeing something in his room. He swore that Ella was standing at the foot of his bed, watching him. She's not gone, he'd mutter to himself during the day, pacing back and forth. His eyes were wild, sunken, like he hadn't slept in weeks. She's still here. No one believed him. They thought he was losing his mind, but I believed him, because I saw her too. It started small. Out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of her, just for a second, standing in doorways or reflected in windows. She was never close, never fully there, but it was her. I know it was. Her face was pale, hollow, and her eyes, they weren't the same. They were dark, like empty pits, staring back at me. Her expression never changed. It was like she was waiting for something, or someone. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew. Ella wasn't resting. She was waiting. Then, the scratches started. It was late one night when I heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound, like nails dragging across the walls. It came from inside the house, from the basement, where they used to lock her away. I wanted to believe it was a rat, or maybe just the house settling. But when I went downstairs to check, I found something much worse. The walls were covered in deep scratches, gouged into the plaster, as if something, or someone, had been clawing at it, trying to escape. But that wasn't the worst part. Above the scratches, carved in the same jagged lines, were words. Words I knew weren't there before. You will pay. My uncle was the first to die. They said he fell down the stairs in the middle of the night, that it was a tragic accident. But I know what really happened. I saw his face before they covered it up. His eyes were wide open, filled with terror, as if he had seen something that shouldn't have been there. After he died, things escalated. The whispers became louder, more insistent. The footsteps started, slow, deliberate, like someone walking through the house in the dead of night. Every time they happened, I would freeze, listening, praying it would stop. But it never did. My aunt, who had locked Ella in the basement so many times, began hearing voices. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the whispers followed her everywhere. In the bathroom, in her bedroom, even in her car. Always the same voice. Always Ella. She begged for it to stop, but it didn't. She started sleeping with the lights on, but that didn't help either. One morning, I found her sitting on the floor of her room, her eyes wide and vacant, mumbling to herself. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't respond. All she did was repeat the same phrase over and over. She's coming for me. She's coming for all of us. The family unravels. The rest of the family didn't fare much better. My cousins, once so full of life, started looking hollow and gaunt. They hardly spoke anymore, their eyes darting around the house as if they were waiting for something. I knew what they were waiting for. Ella. It was only a matter of time before she came for them too. My uncle wasn't the only one to die. A week after his fall, my cousin John was found dead in his bed. He had scratches all over his arms, deep and jagged, as if he had been trying to claw something off of him. The coroner said he died of a heart attack, but I know that's not true. He died of fear. He died because Ella wanted him to. Then my aunt disappeared. One day she was there, sitting in the living room, rocking back and forth, her eyes darting to the darkened corners of the room. The next day, she was gone. No one knows where she went, and frankly, no one cares. But I know she didn't leave on her own. Ella came for her. She dragged her away into whatever dark place she now lives. I thought I was safe. I thought I'd be spared, that Ella wouldn't come for me because I had tried to protect her. I wasn't like the others. I loved her. But lately, I've been hearing something too. At first, it was just a whisper in the dark, something I could ignore. But now it's louder, clearer. I hear it in my dreams, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone is standing over me, watching. Last night, I woke up to find a message scratched into the wall beside my bed. I'm coming, and I know she is. My father is a park ranger. He took me with him on the night shift. I should have listened to his rules. I didn't want to say it out loud, but deep down I knew. It was my fault my dad was missing. No matter what cryptic, unnatural creatures lurked in that god-forsaken park, he'd been safe until I showed up. I was the weak link, the crack in his armor. Through me, they'd sensed his vulnerability, and they fed on it. His fear had drawn them closer, just like mine. Now, the chances of seeing him again were growing dimmer, and it was all on me. I knew it. I buried it, though, pushed it down into a black pit in my chest, until the weight sank into my gut, twisting into a knot that would never loosen. I sat huddled at the checkpoint, a threadbare blanket draped over my trembling shoulders, though it wasn't the cold that made me shake. Martin approached silently, his eyes dull and lips tight, and I tried to steel myself. My mind screamed at me to ask him about the park, about the rules, about my dad, but a cold doubt gnawed at me. Was this even the real Martin? He sat beside me without a word. The night stretched on around us, a never-ending cloak of darkness. The trees loomed like skeletal giants against the sky, which was black and bottomless, void of stars. 4 hours ago, I'd been with my dad, searching for constellations. Now I wasn't sure if he was even still alive. "I'm sorry." Martin finally broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper. "What do you mean?" I shot him a glance, trying to catch his expression, but he stared ahead at the tree line. "I'm sorry about your dad." "Don't say that." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You say it like he's dead." Martin didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. My pulse quickened, a hot, sick feeling bubbling up in my throat. I turned to face him fully, my hands balled into fists. "He's not dead. He isn't." Still nothing. The silence felt suffocating, pressing in on me. Without thinking, I slammed my fist into his arm. He jerked away, wincing. "It's not my fault. He shouldn't have brought you here," he muttered under his breath, as if that was some kind of explanation. "Tell me everything you know. About this park, the rules, all of it. I deserve the truth. I need it if I'm going to find him." My voice cracked as the words tumbled out in desperation. Martin's face twisted in uncertainty, his gaze flitting around as if searching for an escape. He stayed silent so long I thought he wasn't going to answer at all, but then he sighed, his shoulders slumping as he leaned forward, his voice barely audible. "We thought they were just stories. Me, Paul, the others. When we got hired, we heard all the legends, the warnings, but we figured they were just ghost stories. You know, something to keep us on our toes. We laughed it off until..." He trailed off, looking over his shoulder into the trees. "Until we saw it ourselves." My heart pounded in my chest, the unease thickening with every second. Even Martin, who'd been working here for years, couldn't shake the terror etched into his features. His next words barely made it past trembling lips. "This place is massive, bigger than anyone realizes. No one ever bothers to explore it because they know better, even if they don't admit it. We started writing things down, occurrences, strange happenings, hoping we could make sense of it. Maybe even find a pattern, a way to avoid them." I clenched the blanket tighter, feeling the weight of his words like ice in my veins. He was sweating despite the chill in the air, and I could see his hands trembling. "We didn't know this could happen. No one ever disappeared before. We just thought they were messing with us, scaring us, hurting us. But never this." His voice cracked, and he rubbed his face with both hands, trying to erase whatever memory haunted him. Paul never even believed in any of it. Not until... I felt my resolve crumbling. I was too alert to cry, too filled with terror and adrenaline to let it all out, but I wanted to. I wanted to collapse, scream, and sob until I couldn't feel anymore. "So why let anyone in? Tourists? Campers?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "They don't care about most people," Martin said after a moment, his eyes dull and distant. "Only those who wander off. It's like they can sense it in you, the desire to get lost. And then, they help you disappear." A chill snaked down my spine. I crossed my arms tightly over my chest, trying to keep warm, but the cold was bone deep. "I need your help, Martin. I can't do this alone. I need to find him." "Tomorrow morning," he said softly. "No," I snapped, standing up. "We go now. He could get hurt. He could be..." "He's out there now?" A voice cut through the air, sharp and unfamiliar. I turned to see a woman stepping out of the cabin, her face shadowed by the dim light behind her. "My dad is missing," I answered quickly. She frowned and glanced at Martin. "Which post?" 62, Martin said quietly. Her face paled. "That's my next shift. I'll help you. We can drive to the post and search from there." Martin hesitated, his eyes drifting from the cozy warmth of the cabin back to the oppressive darkness of the woods. With a sigh, he stood, motioning for me to follow him to his car. We drove in silence, the forest pressing in on all sides. When we reached the post, we found my dad's ATV parked near a massive oak tree, but no sign of him. The trees were thick, too dense for the car to get through, so we got out to search on foot. The rules swirled in my mind. No strange markings. Watch for the one-armed man. If you hear whistling. We trudged deeper into the forest, our flashlights cutting through the dense fog of shadows. I called out for my dad, my voice growing hoarse with each shout. The branches seemed to reach for us, curling around my jacket, trying to pull me back into the dark. Ahead, something moved behind the trees. "Who's there?" I shouted, heart pounding. "Oh, wouldn't you like to know?" The voice was shrill, cackling, like nails on a chalkboard. My blood ran cold. A pair of gnarled hands appeared on either side of a tree, slowly tracing its outline, almost as if it were alive. The voice continued, playful, malicious. "Have you seen my face?" I couldn't speak. My breath caught in my throat. "Would you like to?" Martin fired his gun, and the thing let out an unholy wail that echoed through the trees, a sound that felt like it tore through my very soul. The silence that followed was suffocating. "We need to leave," Martin whispered, his voice shaking. But I wasn't leaving without my dad. Suddenly I heard a whistle, soft and distant, but unmistakable. The whistling is far away, which means they're close. Before I could react, Martin lunged for me, but darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke, it was daylight. The woods were still, and Martin was gone. Disoriented, I stumbled to the ATV. I had to keep searching. My dad was out there somewhere. As I drove back toward the post, I saw a silhouette, one-armed, climbing down from the lookout. Panic surged through me. I sped up, but the ATV sputtered to a stop, out of gas. Footsteps approached. "Kid," a familiar voice rasped, "I see you met my wife." I spun around, my heart in my throat. "You want to find your dad, don't you?" The one-armed man's grin stretched wide, his single tooth gleaming. "Don't come near me," I warned, but he laughed, a harsh, dry cackle that rattled my bones. "Don't worry, I spoke to him this morning." Rage overtook fear. I charged at him, hitting him with all my strength. He barely flinched, his toothy grin never fading. I ran. My legs screamed in agony, my lungs burned. But I didn't stop until I reached the post. I locked myself inside, shaking, my heart hammering in my chest. I dialed my dad's number one more time. "Kev?" His voice crackled through the speaker. Tears welled up in my eyes. "Dad, where are you?" His voice was strained, weak. "Kev, get out of the forest. They'll let me go, but they want you.